Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or more commonly known as FDR, contracted what was believed to be polio in 1921 at the age of 39, which left him paralyzed from the waist down and unable to walk without assistance. Well, FDR and his team, particularly close advisor Louis Howe, believe the public would perceive his disability as a weakness and that it would hinder his political career. Therefore, they carefully managed his public image to project strength and viability. Well, there was a press cooperation, let's call it that. There was a gentleman's agreement among FDR and journalists of the era to avoid coverage or photographs of him in a wheelchair or in any other vulnerable state. FDR used a self-designed armless kitchen chair with wheels for mobility in private, which was less bulky than the standard wheelchairs of the time. And in public, he would walk short distances by wearing heavy steel leg braces and using a cane and lean heavily on the arm of an aide or one of his sons. Well, as far as the public appearances were concerned, they were meticulously choreographed, often involving ramps and sturdy podiums that he could grip for support. Yeah, the Secret Service agents were known to confiscate or even destroy film from photographers who managed to capture an image of him in his wheelchair. As far as the public knew, though, most Americans were aware that he had suffered from polio and was lame. They were generally unaware, though, of the full extent of his paralysis and his private reliance on a wheelchair. I say all of this because, in a way, that was a cover-up of the condition of a president of the United States. It was done not because of any security threat or whatever the case may be. It was just simply done for the political expediency of the candidate. I mean, if everything was crystal clear, if everything was transparent, then you would have shown FDR in a wheelchair and his condition. And it didn't hinder him from being a president. I wasn't a big fan of his presidency, but the voters would have known the full extent, and they could have made an informed decision when voting. Well, we had something very similar happen to us recently, and what has come to light now is the testimony from insiders of the Biden administration. Virginia Kruta, who writes for the Daily Wire, wrote this, said, much like the media talking heads and elected Democrats who waited until former President Joe Biden was well clear of political risk before they admitted that he was not in top form, a number of those in his inner circle kept mum on the subject until President Donald Trump had returned to the White House. In closed-door testimony before the House Oversight and Governmental Reform Committee, more than a dozen former Biden aides fielded the usual questions that follow any political scandal or cover-up, like, who knew what, and when did they know it? The Oversight Committee released a report last Tuesday on Biden's autopen presidency. Yeah, the autopen presidency, which it's become known as, which sought to determine what decisions were made directly by President Biden And how many times might the auto pen have been used to sign his name without his understanding of the issue or his knowledge that was even happening? In pursuit of that information, they heard from 14 former Biden aides, some of whom took the fifth, and some of whom revealed the concerns they had previously left unspoken. Now, the Daily Wire previously reported a few revealed that despite making the rounds on the cable news shows in Biden's defense, they had rarely spoken to the president, much less seen him in person. Biden's White House chief of staff, Jeff Zients, he told the oversight that the president increasingly forgot names, even names of people he saw regularly as his presidency progressed. He also recalled working to reduce the number of steps that Biden would take in order to decrease the risk that he might fall. Months prior to Biden's exit from the presidential race in early 2024, Zients had referred to Biden as energized and voiced his confidence in a successful re-election campaign. Well, senior communications advisor Anita Dunn defended Biden even after his disastrous debate appearance on CNN, telling MSNBC that, quote, it wasn't his greatest debate, but insisted that Biden, quote, has been a great president, and that is the case he's going to take to the American people, unquote. But behind closed doors, and after Biden had stepped away from the public eye, Dunn told members of the committee, I thought his voice was softer and that his childhood stutter reappeared. Biden's former chief of staff, Ron Klein, actually, I think is what it is, revealed the exact moment during the CNN debate that he exclaimed, we're effed. Biden had given a lengthy and nonsensical answer to a question and had ended his ramble with the phrase, we beat Medicare. Yeah, remember that one? Well, Klein, he also noted that the debate prep sessions had concerned him, but had not alarmed him in the same way that the final performance had. Just a few months earlier, Klein had been on MSNBC and had insisted that Biden continue to be great in meetings and in the White House. Well, Mike Donilon, a senior campaign strategist, admitted to the Oversight Committee that he had been part of the White House's and campaign's efforts to limit Biden's travel and activities, saying that at one point that it was a lot to ask to have the president fly from Europe to Los Angeles. But at an event at Harvard on February of this year, even after Biden had left the White House, Donilon continued to defend him, saying, "I don't know how much time any of these people spend with him. I know how much time I spend with him. I know what I saw, and what I can tell you is every time I saw Biden overseas, especially in Ukraine and NATO, he was the voice in the room," unquote. A former Biden press secretary, Catherine Jean-Pierre, has remained entirely consistent, saying even in interviews promoting her new book that she never saw anything to make her believe that Biden was not at the top of his game. When the Oversight Committee spoke with her, she stood firm in that position and repeatedly referred them to the memo provided by Biden's official physician, Kevin O'Connor. O'Connor, when questioned, repeatedly invoked the his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. we reported about that on the podcast. But the gig is up. I mean, this was a cover-up, and it was a world-class cover-up. And And what we're seeing now is that a lot of these Democrats that were involved in this, they just can't give it up. This has been what they've done for so long. They just can't give it up. In fact, Virginia Kruta also reports on Australian news anchor Sarah Ferguson. And Sarah Ferguson did not give former Vice President Kamala Harris an off-ramp during a recent interview, refusing to allow her to sidestep a direct question about former President Joe Biden and his obvious physical and cognitive decline. Harris has been doing press meetings and things for a memoir about her abbreviated presidential campaign, a memoir that spares no feelings as she flings blame for her loss in every direction but inward, of course. And she appeared completely unprepared to address what was possibly the most predictable question of the interview. Here, listen to this.
Wasn't Joe Biden then, to put it on him, wasn't his refusal to recognize his own frailties the reason that you faced a nearly impossible task?
I ran against Donald Trump for president, and Donald Trump ran on a platform that was in large part, I believe, misrepresenting his intentions to the American people. I do believe that there are a fair number of people that voted for Donald Trump who believed him when he told them that his first priority on day one is going to be to bring down prices. And he didn't. And you combine that misrepresentation of intention with also what was at play in terms of massive amounts of mis and disinformation.
Now, forgive me,
and a truncated calendar in terms of the clock.
I want to interrupt you because that is a world-class pivot, but it is not the question that I asked you, which is about Joe Biden's failure to recognize his own frailties and what that did to you. The question is about Joe Biden. Are you still reluctant to criticize the former president?
In what regard, please?
Well, just in terms of that question. So you went
What
on.
exactly would you like to ask? Be more specific, if you don't mind.
Was it Joe Biden's decision, his failure to recognize his own frailties in that position, that put you in the position that made it almost impossible to win that race?
He was not frail as president of the United States.
But he had frailties. We all saw the debate.
I do believe that Joe Biden had the capacity to be president of the United States, and I have never doubted that he had the capacity to be president of the United States. If you want to talk about whether he had the ability to endure what a race for president of the United States would require in that political environment in 2024, as I've said in the book, I had concerns.
I'm just wondering, is there a reason why you won't go to that prolonged frailty question? Now, we saw the debate, we saw the difficulty he had marshalling his thoughts.
I have answered that question. I do not believe
I think it's just hard watching the debate to see how there could not be a problem long term with someone who can't marshal their thoughts. I'm not saying his acuity wasn't present.
I talked about that in the book, and I also mentioned the context in which that debate occurred. And you'll probably remember how I talked about that in terms of what his travel schedule had been, that what he had been enduring in terms of the timing of that debate. I talk about it extensively in the book. I'm not shying away from that. That's why I wrote it in the book, because I do know it's a question people had.
So, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Kamala Harris and others are still covering for Joe Biden. But his cover-up at this point is blown. I mean, take, for instance, USA Today. Okay, there was an opinion piece in USA Today. Now, USA Today, I mean, as a kid, I used to get, I would read the USA Today from time to time. But today, I mean, nobody is going to misconstrue the USA Today for conservative paper, right? I mean, it is definitely not conservative, right? But here's an opinion piece by Nicole Russell, and this is what she has to say about this. After reading the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee's October 28th report on Joe Biden's cognitive decline and his inner circle's dishonest and deliberate cover-up. She says, I'm furious. Chairman James Comer, the Republican from Kentucky, said in a statement that the report, based on 14 dispositions and transcribed interviews with key Biden aides, shows that some staff colluded to mislead the public. That's in quotes. Colluded to mislead the public and went to great lengths to, quote, sustain the appearance of presidential authority as Biden's capacity to function independently diminished, unquote. Now, Comer and the committee deemed executive actions that Biden's staff performed via the auto pen null and void. So they said that those actions that were done by the auto pen should be null and void. The committee's findings are so serious that he called on the U.S. Department of Justice to review Biden's executive actions and scrutinize a few members of staff that they interviewed. Like many Americans, I suspected, she says, that Biden was suffering from declining health and that his administration was covering it up, raising ethical and practical questions about who was actually running the White House. This report confirms that and then some. I'm going to repeat that. This report confirms that and then some. Biden's inner circle knew he was in poor health, but instead of helping him or relieving him of his presidential duties, they sought to maintain power at any cost. And this is what she says. She says the Democratic Party was and remains unfit to run America. Who was running the White House during Biden's last year? The committee report is so damning that it raises virtual questions about who was really running the White House, particularly during the last year of Biden's presidency, when thousands of clemencies were granted. We'll talk a little more about those clemencies here in a second. The report found evidence that Biden experienced a mental and physical decline so significant that senior White House officials covered it up by restricting his access to the public or ensuring that any access to him was heavily controlled. Because of his decline, staff facilitated, this is in the report, the staff facilitated executive actions without direct authorization from President Biden himself, including through misuse of the auto pen and failures in documenting decision-making processes. That is in the report. The report says that vital decisions were executed without confirming with President's approval, particularly pardons and commutations toward the end of his presidency. And she said, I wrote previously that Biden bungled his responsibility anyway because he reduced the sentences of people who committed horrible crimes. He wound up granting 4,245 requests for clemency, more than any other president. To now discover that an unknown number of these were likely made without his express approval is unethical at best, corrupt at worst. In damning video testimony, one of Biden's top staffers, that Mike Donilon I talked about, admitted that he was given $4 million to help with Biden's campaign and was told that if Biden won a second term, that he would have received another $4 million. And he squirmed and hesitated in answering the questions about it. I mean, if you see the video on this, it's almost painful. The lawyers are just having to do everything they can to pick out the information he does not want to give up. But receiving a cool $8 million to help a president stay in office and win re-election might explain the motive behind why Donilon at least didn't raise any red flags about Biden's decline. Republicans were right about Biden the whole time, she says. Again, this is USA Today, okay? Republicans were right about Biden the whole time. I wasn't surprised to read this report, even though I was angry at some of the new details. Journalists and even former staff have written books detailing the last year or more of Biden's health issues and chaotic White House. The fact that the truth has trickled out via journalists who reported on the White House after Biden dropped out of the presidential race in 2024 and Vice President Kamala Harris lost the election didn't provide reassurance to voters. It raised further suspicions, of course. Investigations like these served to confirm what we knew all along. Biden's inner circle gaslit the American people about what was going on. This is unacceptable, and it will take some time for the Democratic Party to recover from this loss of trust. I will say this, she says. While it's true that the Democratic Party has shown its true colors with the Biden administration, I have not lost hope in America or in the American people. For the most part, many people, particularly Republicans, saw through the charade. Despite the verve of legacy news media pushing Biden's and then Harris's candidacy, over 77 million people either suspected something was off or just still thought that Donald Trump was a better candidate, and the Republican Party would serve them better. But this doesn't let Biden's inner circle off the hook. They were who we thought and worse. I mean, she talked a lot here about those receiving clemency from Joe Biden, and so I know it's only been about a year, okay, but we tend to forget some of these things. We tend to just move on, and we kind of wipe some of these things from our memory. So I wanted to take a step back. Let's look back and remember what was being done just earlier this year, like February, okay? Former President Joe Biden granted more acts of clemency than any previous chief executive on record, according to the Pew Research analysis of statistics from the U.S. Department of Justice. This is written by John Kramlich, which writes for the Pew Research Center. He says, overall, Biden granted 4,245 acts of clemency during his 4-year tenure in the White House. That far exceeds the total of any other president since the beginning of the 20th century, including Franklin D. Roosevelt, who granted 3,796 such acts during his 12 years in office. It is also far ahead of the current total of President Donald Trump. Now, looking at the chart that they provide here, that Pew Research provides, there's a couple things that stand out. If you combine the clemencies of all Republican presidents, if you combine them all together, all the Republican presidents, you combine them together, you would have to go all the way back to President Hoover in 1929 to surpass the number of clemencies handed out by President Joe Biden in just the one term. Combine them all together. President Bush, for example, in his one term, ending in 1993, only handed out 77 clemencies. Democrats have definitely been the ones that like to throw around the clemencies. I mean, if you look on this chart, President Wilson, he handed out 2,827 clemencies. President Roosevelt, 3,796. We just talked about that. President Truman, 2,044. President Johnson, 1,187. And President Obama, almost 2,000. He hit the 1,927 mark. So looking at the Justice Department data another way, Biden granted 29%, almost a third of all the clemency requests that he received, he granted them. That was the highest percentage of any president since Richard Nixon, who granted 36% of the petitions that he received. Biden, however, received far more requests than Nixon, and so the numbers are, a little bit skewed. But the clemency power is enshrined in the U.S. Constitution and can refer to multiple forms of presidential mercy, and really it comes down to like 4 different forms. Number 1, pardons. Pardons forgive past crimes and restore civil rights. Commutations is another one, and commutations completely or partially reduce sentences for people in prison or on community supervision. Then there's remissions, which reduce financial penalties associated with convictions. And then there's respites, which are just like temporary reprieves, usually granted to inmates for like medical reasons or something like that. Somebody's gotten really old and they're about to die, and so they give them a respite and until they actually pass away or something. The Justice Department's statistics do not count clemency granted to entire classes of people by proclamation, such as the actions taken by Presidents Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford to forgive thousands of Vietnam-era draft dodgers. Biden granted clemency this way too. In October of 2022 and December of 2023, he granted pardons by proclamation to people convicted of certain federal marijuana offenses. And in June of 2024, he issued a proclamation granting pardons to former military service members convicted of violating a service repealed ban on consensual gay sex. Well, a closer look at Biden's pardons and commutations over the 4 years. Biden issued 80 pardons and 4,165 commutations for a total of the 4,245 acts of clemency. The number of pardons Biden issued is the second lowest on record. Only George H.W. Bush granted fewer with 74, but the nature of some of Biden's pardons is historically unique. Biden issued preemptive pardons, so like people haven't even done anything yet, or they haven't been accused of anything yet, but he's going to pardon them anyway. And pardon several prominent people who had not been convicted of, charged with, or even investigated for any crimes. They include Dr. Anthony Fauci, of course, the longtime director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. We've talked about that one. And how about retired General Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? Several members of his own family and members of the staff of the U.S. House Committee that investigated the January 6th, 2021 riots at the U.S. Capitol, as well as police officers who testified before the panel. Biden said that he issued the pardons preemptively to protest recipients, to protect recipients against potential future prosecutions by the Trump administration. So, unlike his relatively infrequent use of pardons, Biden stands out for the sheer number of commutations that he granted. His total was more than double the number granted by the next closest president, Barack Obama, who issued 1,715 during his 8 years in office. Biden's many commutations included a near total emptying of the federal government's death row. So he basically just cleared off death row. On December 23rd of 2024, he commuted a sentence of 37 of the 40 federal death row inmates to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The three death row inmates whose sentences Biden did not commute were convicted in cases involving terrorism or mass murder. But Biden also saved nearly all of his clemency acts until the final week of his presidency. While every president since Ford has issued pardons and commutations in the last days in office. Biden granted 96% of his acts of clemency in his final fiscal year, which was the period between October 1st of 2024 and his departure from the White House in January 20th. On January 20th. Now, on January 17th alone, so just 3 days before he left, he granted 2,490 commutations, more in a single day than any prior chief executive had granted over his entire presidency. Just in that one day, he granted more than any other president in all of their time as president. Biden's expansive use of clemency contrasts with recent trends. Before Biden, presidents had generally become less forgiving over time, at least when looking at the share of clemency requests that they grant. Every president from William McKinley to Carter granted at least 20% of the requests that they received. But the percentage fell to 12% for Ronald Reagan, and to single digits for every subsequent president until Biden. Obama's clemency record tells a mixed story. In absolute numbers, Obama granted more acts of clemency than more recent presidents, with that 1927 number. But that still worked out to just 5% of the clemency requests that he received. Among the lowest percentages of any president, actually, if you take it by percentage. Obama's low percentage was largely due to the fact that his administration encouraged federal prisoners to apply for leniency under a program known as the Clemency Initiative. So he just got inundated because he asked for them. The program, which launched in April of 2014 and ended when Obama left office in 2017, established specific criteria that the administration would prioritize in clemency decisions. Overall, Obama received more than 36,000 clemency petitions during his time in office, by far the most of any president, of course. Acts of clemency have often been controversial. Several aspects of Biden's clemency record, including his use of preemptive pardons and things like that, he issued to family members have drawn backlash. But Biden is far from the only president who sparked controversy, but he is the one who did the most. So we can see that President Biden was giving out clemencies like candy. But the question remains, was it him doing it, or was it someone else doing it? I would love to hear what you think about that. And of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening.
This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.